It was a dingy little apartment, hidden away in a shady corner of the city. The building looked otherworldly, the walls chipping away with age, and the windows cracked and filthy. Inside, the room was murky and dull, with only one flickering lamp spewing a pale yellow light. The air reeked of staleness, and the walls were littered with shelves containing aged books and oddities. In the middle of the room sat a woman, huddled over a small table. Her hair was straggly and messy, and her complexion was pallid and sallow. She was fixated on a black cat that sat calmly at the edge of the table, its tail swishing back and forth. The woman lived alone, seldom leaving her apartment, preferring to devote her days to her feline companion. The cat was her only confidant, her sole buddy, and she cherished it with an intense passion that bordered on lunacy. However, one night, the woman heard an odd scratching noise originating from inside her apartment. Initially, she ignored it, thinking it was a minor irritation, a petty disruption to her otherwise peaceful existence. But as the sound grew more intense and incessant, it started to consume her, until it was all she could hear. She combed through the apartment, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing. As time progressed, the scratching continued, invading her every waking moment and infiltrating her dreams at night. She became increasingly paranoid, convinced that her cat was involved somehow, conspiring against her, messing with her head. The woman would stare at her cat, observing it for hours on end, waiting for it to reveal a sinister and horrific truth. But the cat just stared back, its emerald eyes blazing in the dark, a silent observer to the woman's madness. One night, the woman's paranoia boiled over. She heard her cat scratch at the door, murmuring in a voice that wasn't its own, advising her to do unspeakable things. She was convinced that the cat was controlling her mind, that it was wicked and had to stop tormenting her, or face her wrath. But the cat didn't budge. The woman was filled with rage and frustration. She couldn't bear the thought of living with the constant scratching sound any longer. She had to put an end to it, no matter what it took. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and marched towards the door, ready to confront whatever was causing the sound. As she approached, she could hear the scratching growing louder and more frantic. With shaking hands, she opened the front door, expecting to find some sort of demonic creature waiting for her in the hallway. But to her surprise, there was nothing there. No monster, no evil spirit, not even her cat. Just the sound of scratching echoing in the empty corridor. As she backed into her apartment and closed the door, the woman couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up inside of her again. The scratching started up again, but this time it was emanating from a figure, a dark figure hiding behind the couch in the living room. The woman's vision blurred as she stumbled towards the couch, overcome by a rush of uncontrollable rage. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. In a sudden burst of violence, she launched herself at the figure on the couch, pummeling it with her fists. In her mind, she was fighting against a faceless enemy, a symbol of all the pain and frustration that had built up inside her. As she began to choke the figure, her hands closing around its neck, a sudden realization washed over her. This was not an enemy, but her beloved cat, the one constant source of comfort and companionship in her life. Horror flooded through her as she felt the life slipping away from the tiny body in her grasp. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face, as she realized what she had done. Despite the cat's demise, the scratching sound persisted, haunting her every moment. It felt like it was consuming her mind, driving her to madness. The memory of what she had done weighed heavily on her conscience, and she could feel her sanity slipping away. Days turned into weeks, and the woman became more reclusive and disconnected from reality. She stopped taking care of herself, stopped eating and sleeping, and spent most of her days mumbling to herself and staring into space. It was months later when the authorities finally discovered her. A neighbor had reported a foul smell emanating from her apartment, and the police were dispatched to investigate. Upon entering the apartment, they found the woman lying on the floor, her body frail and dirty. She was muttering to herself, seemingly oblivious to their presence. The police searched the apartment and discovered a putrid smell coming from one corner of the room. Upon further investigation, they found a dead cat wrapped in a blanket. When questioned, the woman rambled on about the scratching sound that had driven her to madness and forced her to mistakenly take the life of her beloved pet. She was overcome with guilt and shame for what she had done, and she felt consumed by the darkness that had taken over her mind. The woman was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where she received treatment for her severe mental illness. She spent the rest of her days there, a shell of her former self, haunted by the memory of what she had done. As for the apartment, it was left abandoned and forgotten, the walls crumbling and the floors creaking with age. But every so often, a faint scratching sound could be heard, as if the ghost of the woman's cat was still lingering in the shadows, reminding anyone who listened of the tragic events that had taken place within its walls. The scratching sound persisted, even long after the woman had been taken away. It echoed through the halls of the apartment building, sending shivers down the spines of those who heard it. Some claimed that it was the ghost of the woman's cat, seeking revenge for its untimely demise. Others believed it was the woman herself, trapped in the afterlife and unable to let go of the guilt and shame that had consumed her. As time passed, the apartment became a legend, a place shrouded in mystery and darkness. People whispered about the scratching sound, about the woman who had lost her mind and the cat that had paid the price. But for those who knew the truth, the scratching sound was a reminder of the fragility of the human mind, of the darkness that lurks within us all. Years turned into decades, and the apartment was eventually torn down, replaced by a shiny new building. But even now, on quiet nights, some still claim to hear the scratching sound, drifting up from the depths of the earth like a warning to those who dare to delve too deep into the darkness.